Alright guys, welcome back to another video. So in this one we're going to be doing a quick shop tour of the new layout of my shop. Now in the last shop tour video I did, kind of in the middle of the summer, I talked about how I don't normally do shop tours because I change up the layout of my shop on probably a monthly basis. And the reason why is I absolutely hate cleaning it. In fact, I can't do it most of the time. So I have no problem doing like a weekend tidy to get the shop back up and organized, or cleaning it, or after like I've used a lathe and there's a bit of a mess, I can clean that up no problem. But when the shop gets really bad, that's when I just kind of hit that point where like I don't even want to clean there. And so when I do start trying to do some cleaning, that's when I always get in the mindset of, well, let's try changing some things up. Let's try doing something different. And so that's why I just constantly am changing up the layout of my shop. Now, is this the best thing for, functionality and all that? Probably not. But I find it pretty fun because I can try out a whole bunch of different layouts, see what works best for me, and just kind of see how it goes. So in that last shop tour video, I had a few people ask me to just keep updating the shop tours because I constantly change my layout and I'm trying different things. People want to see what I'm thinking, see the different ideas and all that. And I think that's a great idea to share some of this stuff. Because when I change the layout of my shop, I do it with as much thought and process as I possibly can. I think about where I'm placing everything, how I'm going to move certain stuff through it. And especially anytime I introduce a new tool or a new thing in the shop, then I definitely have to change the layout. Right now, the thing that has really changed the layout of the shop is the fact that I've started collecting a whole bunch of logs and I've been breaking that down into lumber and that. Bringing all those logs back, I need some place to store them, and I now have a pretty good storage area, which I'll show you guys in just a minute here. Okay, so the workbench area. Obviously, the workbench is still in the same place you guys have seen it for the past few months. I really like having the workbench here. It's by far my favorite spot for it because I have full 360 access to it, which means that, if I'm working on a part, I can run around, work on it from this side, or if I'm doing a really stressful glue up, I can come back over here to fix it. Having that full access around the workbench is just awesome. I love it so much. And the only real big difference with the placement of the workbench this time is that it's a little bit further away from it. So where I had it before, I could just barely fit my camera tripods on that side, and they were very tight, they had to be at weird angles and that. But now I can put either one of my camera tripods on that side of the workbench and it's no issue. But the biggest thing in this area is now this whole wall behind me. So in my last setup, I basically just had an island in the middle of the garage here with 4 of my tools. My jointer, planer, drill press, and then drum sander. We're all kind of in a circle in the middle of the shop. What I've done now is I've kind of created these little alleys that basically go from my lumber rack across the garage. So basically how it works is all of my lumber can come in, especially in the winter here when I want to unload my truck pretty quickly, I can just chuck all the lumber onto my workbench. Then I can close the big garage door, stash all the lumber away. Then when I get going on a project, I can bring all the lumber back to my workbench, start by breaking it down, which conveniently enough, I've got my circular saw right here now, so it's super easy to grab. Then once I've got that lumber roughed out with my circular saw, I'm over to the bandsaw now. I can start roughing stuff out on there. But the other part of this is I now have access to the 4 tools that I needed good access to. So mainly the shop back here, I now have a dedicated spot for it where it's always going to be plugged in. It's right by all of my messiest tools. So the bandsaw makes an absolute mess. It's going to be super easy to clean it up now. Drill press always makes a mess anytime you're drilling anything because there's no collection on it. Same thing with my belt and spindle sander on the end here. I can very easily go through and clean that stuff up. Next up with the circular saw here, obviously having it close to the workbench where I can just grab it and cut is super easy. I've got the charger for it right on the end here, so I can always keep this thing fully charged up and ready to go. Having the drill press right by the workbench here means I don't have to think about going over to the drill press. I literally just have to turn around, drill whatever holes I need to drill. This is going to be a great functionality upgrade because I don't use the drill press enough. And having it right here now, it really just gives me no excuse. Then on the end here, I've got my belt/spindle sander all set up and ready to go. This is a tool that I normally have stashed away on the back counter. And again, it's a tool that I don't use often enough because I always have to set it up and that takes effort. So I always find a different way to do it. Now that I can just have it set up and ready to go, it's gonna make life a lot easier. You might also recognize the table that this thing is sitting on. It's I think it's my first furniture project that I've ever posted on my YouTube channel here. It's this super ugly maple table that, it looks horrible in my opinion. But it makes for some great shop furniture. And luckily enough, it was the exact same height as the dresser that my drill press is sitting on. So everything worked out there. This is nice, solidly in place. It's not gonna move around on me. And this also gave me a little bit more storage. So I've got my cookie tray that I keep my sharpening stuff in. I've got my knife making supplies at the bottom, and then all my water stones are on the bottom shelf there. So overall, this is a great upgrade. Especially having these 2 tools nice and accessible is gonna make my life a lot easier. Because now if I need to touch up an edge of something or I need to sand something really quick, I've got this sitting here. Same thing with drilling holes. I can now consistently drill nice, square, straight holes super easily because the drill press is just right there. I don't have to go over to it. I literally just have to turn around from the workbench. Then on my lumber storage, that hasn't changed since the last video. At least this part of the lumber storage hasn't changed. I still have my mess of walnut over there. I got my main lumber storage here with a whole bunch of wood for some upcoming projects. Then I've got a whole bunch of small pieces just on the shelves over there. The only real difference is I now have these logs that I'm starting to break down. This probably isn't a permanent spot for them. Obviously, as I break down more of them, we're going to start taking over way more space. So I'll probably find a better solution eventually. But for now, I just have the first 4 logs that I've broken down just sitting right there. So in the middle area here is dedicated to the jointer. That's basically it. So I've got the jointer here, and then another project from my past, the hickory and walnut bench that I built a long time ago. I've got the base for it right here, so I've got this nice solid walnut base sitting here. And this is basically just going to be a table where I can put all of my parts that I need to join on this table. So they're all just nicely sitting right here. That way I'm not trying to stack them on my bandsaw or stack them on the sander back there. They're just all right here and ready to go and just get passed through the planers. I can place them back here, or I can place them on this table behind me that's right beside the planer and the drum sander. And the last row of machinery here is the planer and the drum sander. Then in the middle here, I've got my little DeWalt folding table, which is another really nice upgrade here compared to a lot of my previous setups, because now I actually have a place to put the stuff that I need to drum sand or plane to thickness. Rather than trying to stack it on top of the machine in this case, or just not having anywhere to put it in the case of the drum sander. So I now have a dedicated space to put the stuff for these 2 machines. Well, we're back here. I should just mention that this is just kind of my excess stuff shelf. So on the top here, I've got my long rest for my lathe. I've got my Lee dovetail jig, and then these bottom 3 shelves are just kind of miscellaneous tools and stuff that I need around the shop, so just stuff that doesn't particularly matter. So next area here, behind the table saw, we have the dedicated log storage area. So like I said, this has become a pretty big thing that I've started doing lately. I've got a whole ton of different wood here, so I have my original apple wood that's stacked in the back there. That's still probably got a few months of drying time left on some of the thinner pieces. I've got some spruce logs, some elm, some box elder, and then a single piece of mountain ash all in there. I've also got the aspen that we collected a while back. All this stuff is this is just gonna be my area for this stuff, as well as my scrap buckets that I've currently filled up that need to go to the dump still. So not the most organized of areas, but this is just kind of dead space that I really wasn't using anyway. So this is a pretty good use of it, and this is just all temporary. These logs are eventually gonna get processed, stacked somewhere else, and then hopefully once I've got them processed, then I can stack them back here in a much more organized fashion. And then as I bring more logs in, I can process them, get them stacked. But for now, it's just kind of the organized disaster zone of the shop. So the last area here is probably the most important. So the front of it, I've got my table saw set up. And I forgot to mention it when we were talking about the log area, but I now have a dedicated outfeed table. For the longest time, I've had a little temporary one that I've been taking on and off. I now have an actual piece of melamine that is mounted to my table saw and mounted to a sawhorse on the other end that is fixed in place. So I don't have to worry about it sliding off. And that kind of grooves in it for my miter gauge, all that kind of stuff. So it's an actual like permanent setup. It is kind of temporary. I want to build something better in the future, but this is just so I can kind of start to figure out what I want that to be. That's a really nice upgrade too with this new layout. The lathe, again, another thing that hasn't changed. Same thing with the dust collector. And I believe the router table was sitting here in the last shop tour video too. But I now stashed the mortiser on top of the router table because I don't use either of those tools very often. And when I do need either of them, it's very easy to just throw the mortiser up on the workbench. That way I can either use the router table or use the mortiser on the workbench. Now the trick is that this is a very big space in here, and that was exactly what I wanted. The whole goal is to just keep this area as clear as possible, because this is the area where, you know, if I need to turn something around or I need to assemble a big project, it's gonna happen right here. So at some point in the future here, I want to get another of the padded mats. I've got one in front of my workbench and the bandsaw and all that, you know, this whole section right here. I want to get another large one that'll basically cover this area. And the other reason that this space needs to be fairly large is when I record videos working on the lathe, I'll pull the lathe out at an angle to about here. That way I can set up my cameras in that behind and actually get different angles and shots of it. So not everything is just a side-on shot of me turning something on a lathe. So as you guys can see, the new setup is slightly different than the last. The biggest difference is obviously in this middle section here and having just a little bit more access to my tools and having more of my tools set up, which is really, really nice. Now, the 2 biggest changes here are kind of the ones that are the least exciting. And so the first one is the outfeed table and the table saw. I've needed to build some kind of solid outfeed table for my table saw since I got it. It allows you to just push pieces through the table saw and not have to worry about what's happening on the other side of the blade. So you don't have to reach over the blade or anything like that, which is what I've been having to do for a little while now, and it's not a super safe thing to do. The other thing is the dust collection. So my dust collection with this setup is going to be marginally worse than what it was before, but it's actually for a much better reason, and it's going to be a lot safer. So what I had before is right from the outlet of the Cyclone, I had a hose that I'd run out from there going to that center island of tools. But the problem with that is then I had that 4-inch flex hose sitting right through that main thoroughfare of the shop, right where I was showing you guys where I have the lathe, the table saw, that kind of stuff. I would have that big 4-inch hose just lying across the floor there. And so what would happen time and time again is I'd just get working on a project. I'd be going back and forth between machinery and all that kind of stuff. And I would end up leaving that hose there. And that meant going from the table saw to my workbench, I would have to either step over that hose, which had created a pretty good tripping hazard, which is not really a good thing to have. You want to avoid tripping hazards as much as possible in the shop. Now, I should mention that I haven't fully eliminated the need for having a hose sitting on the floor. I still have the hose right here that is going to go out to all of this machinery right here. I'll just plug it in as I go. But the nice thing is that I have the option to walk around it. It's not right through the main areas that I have to walk. So if I have the hose hooked up to, let's say, the bandsaw or the jointer, which is right here, I can then just walk around the other way to get to the table saw, my workbench, whatever. I don't have to step over that hose like I had to before in order to get to these different machinery and that. Now, another factor that affects all of the layouts that I've done in the shop here is the fact that I use this garage door, pretty consistently. So anytime you open a garage door, if it's raining or, in the case of winter like we're hitting right now, anytime you open that garage door, there's a good chance that some moisture is going to come in through that doorway. So if it's raining and the drain is coming from that direction, that rain can come in, but that water can also build up on the door, and as it opens up, it will drip all along that track. So I found this out the hard way about a year ago. I've got some pretty good rust stains on the surface of my bandsaw because it was under that drip pattern of the door, and some water dripped on it. I didn't catch it in the evening. It sat there overnight, rusted the table pretty dang good. So what I've made sure of here is that anytime I open the garage door, none of the water that's going to drip from it should hit any of my cast iron surfaces. So my bandsaw is kind of in the danger zone here. It's right at the end of the opening of the door. So if there's for some reason moisture building up at the very, very top of the door, it could potentially drip on here, but that's super unlikely and I haven't had it happen yet, so I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. But for the most part, all of my cast iron surfaces are nice and safely away from any of that dripping water. So anyway, that's the new shop layout. If you guys have any questions about why I stuck certain things where, anything like that, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.